Hello and welcome to Turning a New Leaf. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. Instead of just looking at my face, I'm happy to be joined by a guest. I'd like to introduce Marla, who is the founder and principal consultant of MBN Coaching and Consulting. Marla, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Frank. Thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to exploring some of these incredibly timely topics around leadership today.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for giving me an excuse to wear a shirt with a collar. So, Marla, you and I have both been pretty active on social media, sharing information about some of the challenges that we see leaders facing during the COVID-19 pandemic. And those have been some immediate challenges. And I know that I've been thinking a lot about what a post-COVID world looks like and how I think it's going to have long-term impacts on leaderships. And I'm sure you have as well. What do you think some of those challenges might be as we move past dealing with the crisis in the moment to what it looks like after?
Yeah. Of course, I think those challenges are multifold and in many ways interdependent, as are the solutions. I think coming out of post-COVID-19, organizations are going to have to obviously continue to keep front and center concern about their employees' safety and well-being. That's, the length of this coming out of it is unpredictable. So that's going to be a sustained challenge that businesses are going to face. Close on the heels of that is business continuity. And so that's relevant both in the short term as organizations have looked at how they're going to survive in terms of being able to operate and being able to deliver changing customer needs. They're also going to have to look at the same time, Frank, on how to thrive because it's imperative that they start now to address that challenge of what the future is going to look like. For many organizations, that future is going to look different from what they had intended. And they are going to be evaluated by both the markets and by their employees based on how well they create a clear and compelling and relevant vision for the future. I believe that that's part of what will differentiate those organizations who are the most successful from those who aren't.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
I think other challenges we have to talk about pretty seriously, right, are how we're going to deal with the workforce in a different way. We've been forced into remote working, and a lot of companies were already moving strongly in that direction, and this has pushed some that were reluctant to move that way. And I think by and large successfully. Would you agree?
Yes, I think it's been remarkable. As you say, many organizations were already down the path of a transformation that has been taking place from traditional work to sort of this new way of working. And COVID-19 just catapulted everybody into the future. And I think what's really different about this situation is that while some organizations had some people, or often many people, working remotely, suddenly everyone is working remotely, and so it's been jarring. But I'd say by and large, companies have done an excellent job of figuring out sort of the where we work and being able to do that pretty well.
Right. You and I have both have some experience with organizations, global organizations, where you have teams that are distributed around the world. But you could sort of look at those as a federated model, right? Those teams were all self-sustaining. They all had their own structure, which is a very different thing than what we're dealing with now, right? A distributed workforce that was, in a lot of cases, formerly centralized and now is on their own in some cases, let alone not even in teams, right? Individuals on their own.
I think the next big hurdle when we talk about challenges in this transformation is figuring out how we work, because the ways of working have changed dramatically, and people are missing that sense of connection. And that connection is both what brings, career satisfaction to them, a sense of belonging.
I think now we're, starting to talk about the challenges post-COVID, right? So we have now a workforce and a business environment where we've shown that we can be effective remotely, which is going to cause a couple things, in my opinion, right? First of all, businesses are going to say, this might be pretty useful for us as a tool to manage our, our fixed costs, right? By having more of a remote workforce. Some employees are going to say, geez, I was very effective working remotely. I'd sure like to be able to do that more often, if not full time. In some cases, they'll want it full time. In some cases, they'll want it more often. And yet, as you say, a number of employees will be like, no, I really want to get back into the office on a regular basis because it works best for me. And I think we're going to have a future that's a hybrid of those things, right? Which presents a lot of challenges I think it presents challenges for the business. I think it presents challenges for the employees, and I think it presents challenges for the leaders.
Without a doubt. And as we, that sparks another thought for me as we talk about sort of the where people are working. We know that it's also imperative that organizations have the right people with the right capabilities in the right place. And along with emerging from COVID-19, there are some businesses whose strategies are going to change significantly. That's another piece of it, I think, that's going to change, just as we have all of these elements of where people are working changing and how they're working. There will be some changes in terms of what they need to be doing, and that begs the whole issue of either upgrading or hiring different talent.
So assuming we have a workforce that's more distributed in the future and people working remotely, how do we advise leaders, right? How do we advise people who are leading in this environment to handle the spider web that can take them into, right? Where clearly you have people that you may not be able to have work remotely because of the nature of their job. And they might be resentful of those who can work remotely and who are asked to work remotely, and vice versa, right? And how do you maintain accountability? How do you make sure that the things that are supposed to get done are getting done? What advice can we offer to leaders as they move forward? And if they've done their planning and their business knows what they want their workforce to look like, they're still going to have challenges, right, with managing it.
So many challenges. And I think this is the time for extraordinary leaders and extraordinary leadership. So while there are some leaders who sit in that category of being extraordinary leaders on a day-to-day basis, there are many more probably who are ordinary, and this is the time to up their game. I think it's really important to keep in mind the emotional component that is an undercurrent that is happening during this post-COVID-19. People have been shaken. There's an economic piece. There's a piece in terms of their job security and where and how they do work. There's a larger, more profound piece, I think, Frank, in terms of people feeling very vulnerable for themselves and others. And as I said a moment ago, there's a certain, uncertainty to the longevity of that. And so leadership really has to sort of put that humanity at the forefront. These are good leadership practices, but, for me, a foundational piece is that leaders are really need to focus on connectivity as they do this. They need to be connecting with their employees. Yeah. Good leadership practices that you and I know, really, asking the right questions and really listening, making sure that people feel heard, understood, valued for both who they are as well as what they contribute, and have that foundation of trust.
I really couldn't agree more. And you said the magic word for me, right? Trust. I see this as a key skill and a key element of a relationship, because that's what trust is, right? Trust is an emotional response. You can't quantify it. You can't put metrics on trust. Trust is about the relationships that you have with people, and whether or not they see you behave in ways that support what you say. And that's going to become increasingly important both directions. It's also going to be increasingly important that leaders trust the people that work for them. It's one thing to ask the people doing the work to trust the leadership, which we have enough trouble with, right? Trust of leadership is a scarce commodity today, and maybe rightfully so in some cases, as we see bad behaviors demonstrated. But presuming we can gain the trust of those who we're asking to help us, we also need to show our trust in them, that they're acting in the best interest of the company as well as themselves.
This model can't work successfully without that level of trust, Frank, because there's, without that FaceTime, leaders have to trust that employees are doing the right thing. Without that human connection, without that trust, leadership is pretty hollow. And I think then relies alternatively on a command and control style that hopefully everyone agrees is pretty passé.
Yeah, and I'm quite sure personally that we're not going to be able to measure our way to success in this world. Right?
So I offered a moment ago that for me, connectivity is a theme. And so in terms of where leaders need to be focusing now. And so I think it's both leaders focusing on the connection with their employees, as we just discussed. It's also recognizing that working remotely for some people has them feeling pretty isolated and pretty invisible. And so COVID-19 and this isolation, quarantine has taken away the proverbial water cooler, and that, stroll across the street to Starbucks with your colleagues. And so leaders need to be active and intentional about taking what we just talked about, that connection and that opportunity for people to trust one another and really build that culture of trust. They need to pay attention to that and actively seek ways for employees to make those connections. So for me, that's sort of the second most important thing around connectivity.
I agree, and I see an element of self-leadership in there as well, right? Of leaders relinquishing relinquishing some control, and even relinquishing some of the duties of accountability to the team itself, and asking the team, finding ways to bring the team together that transcend the fact that they're not all in the same location, and that they can't go to Starbucks at lunchtime. And one of the ways is going to be to share more of those leadership duties, and to really have people ask more of one another.
Absolutely. I know you have strong views about accountability.
I do. I've often said that I don't believe that accountability is something that you can give to someone. I just simply don't believe it. Accountability is something that someone decides they're going to take. And you can hold them accountable, but you can't make them accountable. If they take it on their own, then it's true accountability. Then hopefully you've instilled the behaviors in them that they'll hold themselves accountable. And I think a little bit of what we're talking about, if you can get the team to hold one another accountable, if you have some interdependence of members of your team, which you almost certainly do, and then hopefully they'll start to hold one another accountable for what they've agreed to do.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So any closing thoughts on the topic of managing a workforce remotely, or at least initially managing a workforce remotely, Marla?
Maybe I would just talk about the third element of connectivity, which I think is important. I think it's both about a remote workforce and it's about any workforce coming through COVID-19. You know, we talked a moment ago about sort of the emotional element of this, and I think not to overstate it, Frank, but I think many people have consciously or unconsciously faced their own mortality as they have gone through this experience. And arguably, many people have re-examined their priorities. So I think, you know, just as we've had families coming together in ways that they haven't come together for generations, I think that all of these experiences have caused people to look at where their priorities are. And more than ever, I think they are looking for organizations where there is a true sense of purpose and they can see themselves in it. And so I would say that, you know, a third thing that leaders need to be doing in this post-COVID environment is, I said it earlier on, but really making sure that the purpose of the organization is clear and that they help each and every employee connect the dots so that there's a clear line of sight between their role and that larger purpose. Because I think that's what's going to help employees be committed and engaged. They want to be hopeful about the future and they want to be able to see themselves in it.
I think that's very important. I agree with you completely. And if I might, there's another element to it that I think is also important, and that's the fact that, you know, this is a shared trauma, right? We're I can't take credit for this. I didn't say it first, but we're all in the same storm, but we're very much not all in the same boat. And I think that's pretty important for us all to recognize, right? Is that we're all going to come out of this with a shared sense of experience, but quite probably a very different set of perceptions. And you know what? We need to let that happen. We need to give people room for that, and we need to recognize it, acknowledge it. I think it's pretty important for leaders to acknowledge that this is an emotional issue, and coming back from this will be an emotional issue. Action. What do you think? Because we might want to believe that everybody feels the same way about what's happening as we do, but they don't.
Of course, yeah, no, it's a point so well made. Of course, they can't, and there will be a complexity to looking at and understanding people's various experiences, and it's so important that we don't think that our lens is the only lens to look through. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think we talked about this probably for as long as anybody wants to listen, at least for now, Marla. We can certainly come back to some of the other topics. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to sit down with me today and discuss these important topics. Where can people find out more about you?
Oh, thank you for that. And thank you first and foremost for this opportunity, Frank. I've really appreciated the chance to, as I said at the beginning, to explore and hopefully evolve these really timely topics that are touching so many of us. So I can be found at www.mbmcoachconsult.com. Thanks.
Make sure that gets put in with the video. And thank you again. I hope we speak again soon. All right.
Sounds great. Thank you, Frank.
Take care.